Hey, apologies for not uploading in a while, but I've been doing some pretty interesting stuff that I'm looking forward to catching you all up on, like getting into an argument with the England manager Roy Hodgson at a conference at Leicester City, going to the Arsenal training ground this morning, and what this video is about, presenting in front of 200 delegates from some of the biggest football clubs in the world. I don't want to name drop, so pause here if you want to read them all, at the OptaPro Forum. This video starts with an interview, and then my presentation is a few minutes after that. Stick around till the end for some updates. And otherwise, I hope you enjoy my talk, An Extra Year of Kindergarten, OptaPro Edition.
So I'm joined now by Joel Solomon. At Messi Minutes, as I understand it. So Joel is due to present at the OptaPro Forum this afternoon. Can you give us a little preview about what your talk's about?
Sure. So I'm talking about youth development in football. I'm asking how efficient is the Premier League, is the top level clubs in England at identifying who the best players are, and then maybe looking at the potential policy implications from that, right? Like if Jamie Vardys don't really exist, then perhaps we should be playing young players really early, because there might be a causal link between the elite level minutes they play early on and how good they turn out to be. Plus, there might not be much point looking for Jamie Vardys if he only comes up, once every 20 years or so. But maybe there are lots of Jamie Vardys that exist, perhaps everywhere, perhaps in certain areas in terms of positions. That's the kind of thing I'm looking at.
What is your opinion of football analytics generally? I mean, it's a huge topic, obviously, but we've heard some really interesting talks so far this morning. Clearly, there are a lot of clubs in attendance today. Yeah. Where do you see the two marrying up? Do you think they marry up at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm heavily biased towards it. I think where clubs can see an advantage, there's no reason why they shouldn't take it. And more, the situation has become that we know that certain aspects of football analytics are important. We know that there's lots of room to grow into in the future. And it's just a matter, I think, of conveying the message for how that's completely directly useful to the work that clubs do. And so to see so many clubs in attendance here, I'm sure lots of them already do a lot of analytic stuff, and I think it will only grow in the future.
And what about your perception of the amateur analytics community, the blogging world? I mean, one of your big things has been the fact that you do a lot of your analysis on YouTube, which is relatively new for a lot of people in this world. Where do you think they are at the minute? Where do you see it developing? And do you think that people should be doing other stuff than they currently are doing?
Should people be doing different stuff? I always think that there's more to the raw data than is currently being explored. I think that might always be true, I don't know, but certainly at the moment I think that is the case. And so there is lots of room for amateur bloggers like myself and people much smarter than me to look into that and try and always find new insights. In terms of where I see it growing into, I'm not sure. I hope it continues to grow as it has. I mean, as I've been in this little community of amateurs and academics and other people, which kind of congregates on Twitter, and it's very exciting there. I've seen it grow from just the Ted Knutson articles into now what is flourishing websites in StatsBob and Analytics FC, and hopefully I'm not doing too rubbish myself. And Tom Lawrence has done some fantastic stuff recently. If we can get more and more people involved with that, which I think as you increase exposure will naturally happen. I have a roommate at uni who I've recently introduced to football analytics, wants to write up some Poisson models. I think it can only grow, the amateur scene.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ryan. To those of you that don't know, my name is Joel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to talk to you today about development in football. It's always a hot topic, but particularly at the moment because of something that I quite like to call the Jamie Vardy dilemma. We've got this guy with Leicester at the top of the league who's broken through at 27, 28 years old, and he's ripping the league apart. And it makes you wonder how efficient is the top level of English football at identifying who the best players are in the league. Is it the case that there are lots of Jamie Vardys, not just in the forward positions, but also potentially elsewhere? Or, as you might expect, are Premier League clubs exceptional at identifying who their most talented available players are? And I think intuition suggests that they are. every single person that I spoke to about my presentation beforehand suggested that I wouldn't have that much to speak to you about today, because the link between players being good and them getting early Premier League minutes is likely to be very strong. If we think of the kind of guys who are getting lots of Premier League minutes at a young age, the Gareth Bales, Sterlings, Hendersons, Wilsheres, these are guys who generally go on to do quite a lot with their careers, or generally at least show some promise. The central question here is, do players who play more senior football early on differ significantly in any meaningful statistical sense than those who do not? If we have a 28-year-old, and if we have two 28-year-olds rather, and one of them broke through into the Premier League at 18 years old, is there anything clearly different about him than some guy who broke through at the age of 27, a Jamie Vardy? And to give you an example of the kind of things I'm talking about, here is a list of every 18 or 19-year-old who has achieved over 2,000 minutes over the last 9 years in the Premier League. I think it's pretty much a list of some of the best homegrown players that Premier League clubs have produced in that time, plus like a couple of League Catamouls who have got their minutes for, who have got significant minutes for lesser clubs and are now playing key roles at those clubs. So we're expecting a pretty strong relationship, but kind of hoping for that. Methodology-wise, to define breakthrough, we're going to be looking at the age at which a player reaches 1,000 Premier League minutes. We need to filter those players, so obviously the data starting at 2006, Ryan Giggs' first few games within that data set are not his breakthrough into the Premier League, and in a similar way, when Angel Di Maria comes into the league and starts every game for Manchester United, he's not breaking into football, having just been the star of Real Madrid's Champions League campaign. But that only leaves us with 42 players if we're only thinking about Premier League players that have directly developed at some point in the league. So I need to expand the definition a little bit. And the way I did that is that if we think about a Ryan Mason, right, who's breaking into the first team at Spurs at like 23, 24, 25, what's happening beforehand, either accidentally or purposefully, either rightly or wrongly, for whatever reason, Spurs are saying that they don't think he's talented enough for their first team, they don't think that he should be playing, and so they're sort of actively rejecting him up until that point. In a similar, slightly more passive, less active way, a guy who's in League 2, League 1, the Championship, or wherever Jamie Vardy was, is effectively, as a group, being rejected by the Premier League clubs. They are not recognising his talent until he starts playing at 27, and so every single player who's broken through into the Premier League since 2006 hasn't played foreign football before that, unless they were on loan from an English club, and they may have played Championship or League 1 football, etc. Before that. We're defining them in our filter. Then we want to ask what their numbers look like at their peak age, right? We want to see if we can predict how good a footballer is in a certain position, in a certain metric that we think is useful to clubs, based on when they break through into the Premier League. We want to see how clear this link is, if at all. We'll then discuss the possible causal link, right? So is it that these elite level minutes, playing lots of Premier League minutes early, are making players good? Is it just the case that good players get good minutes and therefore also become good when they're older, regardless of the minutes that they might have played? And then we'll talk about the possible implications for your clubs and federations going forwards. What are we looking for? Well, in an ideal world, I guess perfect scouting might look something like this. Some guy who's performing very well at the peak of their career in a metric that we're looking to, like, I don't know, Gareth Bale and expected goals. We are expecting him to start very early, right? We're thinking that Spurs are going to identify his talent, they're going to play him at right midfield, although clearly they did not. And then at the peak of his career, he's going to perform very well, and he would have started quite early, whereas a 24-year-old who is not so great won't start for their Premier League side until closer to when they're in the peak of their career, right? When they're more useful to their respective team. And I'm kind of hoping for some of this, right? We're hoping for some market inefficiencies that maybe we can look to exploring more and discuss the possible policy implications of. We're hoping that there are lots of Jamie Vardys, that there's no relationship between how good you are and when the Premier League gives you your breakthrough. I think this is the last slide before I stop waffling and get into some actual results. In terms of metrics, we want two things. Firstly, we want it to be correlated with winning, right? Like, unless we're explicitly describing something, we want it to correlate well to our final goal, which might be positions in the league table, or the amount of goals you score, points you win, something along those lines. And we also want it to be repeatable, right? We want this to represent something quite fundamental to the dynamics of football, that if we repeat it over a 38-game period, or over 2 seasons or whatever, we're likely to see some success. This is a bit more difficult for the player level, right? It's a bit easier for teams, but these are some of the metrics I've used. First one is shots. We know at the team level it works very well in terms of evaluating team successes. There are better things, but it's nice and repeatable even at the player level and links pretty well to goals. To get something a little bit different in terms of creativity, I've looked at the volume of through balls per 90 minutes, which again has some repeatability and is something that might be useful when evaluating some attacking midfielders, etc. Finally, to get something really, or not finally quite, to get something really different in there, a lot of you who would have seen Dustin Ward's work on StatsBomb this year would have seen how key to the fundamental, again, dynamics of the game, deep completions are. I don't have access to deep completion data, so instead I'm working with this opposition half pass accuracy. It's relatively repeatable, and I just wanted to look at quite a diverse group of metrics. I'm not making any claims towards this and winning. And finally, although it's not very repeatable, what we're looking for at the end of the day, or one of the things we might be looking for, is how many non-penalty goals plus assists per 90 minutes our players are contributing. It's not very repeatable, but it's the end goal, so I thought I'd include it in there regardless. Getting into actual results, and first I'm going to go through shots in a little bit of detail. There is no relationship whatsoever between how good you are at, this is actually all ages, and when you broke through into the Premier League. Just to demonstrate this, I want to go through a few names. At the top of the list, we straight away see that maybe shots are not the best metric to use in terms of evaluating individual attacking players. The first guy we come up with is Ishmael Miller. I don't know how many of you know that name, I did not. He made one substitute appearance at the end of 2005-2006 for Manchester City, so I just about included him, barely, and then went on to do not a great deal with the rest of his Premier League career. Gareth Bale, who I think was back up to Asu Akoto for the first 2-3 years at left back for his time at Spurs. Carroll and Sturridge, who are success stories to varying degrees, and Andros Townsend, who it's always funny to see on a list of elite shots takers. They're all getting their minutes pretty early. If we go a bit further, we see them again, then a few names that we're expecting here, right? We're thinking that the Walcotts, the Welbecks are likely to have good numbers. The Premier League is identifying them as good players. And so they should be playing, they should be breaking through into Premier League sides earlier. We are seeing that, but we're also starting to see the Beckfords, the Charlie Austins, who are breaking through after they're already ineligible for the Young Player of the Year award. We're already spotting some large inefficiencies here, not just Jamie Vardy. Go a bit down, and we do find Jamie Vardy nestled in there with a certain Ricky Lambert, and we're really getting a picture of the lack of relationship here. We're seeing quite a few forwards who are breaking through over the last 9 years into the Premier League pretty late, but still managing very strong numbers. So this is probably the biggest professional opportunity of my young career so far, and it's a little bit disappointing to stand here in front of you and demonstrate some 0.03 R-squareds. So we can only explain 3% of the variation in shots per 90 by when a player has broken through. So let's see if I can slightly unscientifically chop and change the data and see if we can find some different relationships within ages, within positions, stuff like that. So before, we had all players. Obviously, defenders, maybe shots is not the best way of measuring their output, so we get rid of them and we really don't improve predictive power in any significant way. The relationship still looks pretty random here. But maybe it's defensive midfielders that are giving me all this noise, right? Maybe shots, apart from a Johannes Geis or someone like that. For someone who's playing deeper in midfield, it's not so important to use those to evaluate players. We get rid of the shots in midfield, and we actually get worse, not better, predictive power. I'm not saying it's particularly strong for midfielders and forwards, but that's what we're going to use going forwards. And then I wanted to break it down in terms of ages, right? Because at the beginning I was talking about the peak performance of these players. What does it look like at 24, 25, 26? Is there any difference depending on when they broke through into the Premier League? And it appears at 24, there isn't any clear relationship. At 25, there still is no significant relationship. At 26, I've still got nothing. And at all of their peak ages, which I've roughly unscientifically defined as being 23 to 30, there is no clear relationship here. All right, well, that's kind of something that I wanted to see anyway. I wanted to know that there were inefficiencies here that we can take advantage of, that we can find some young players in our own squads in the Premier League and in divisions below that can significantly help our team. But I'd like to see some clear relationships. So going through some of the other metrics very quickly, through balls, there's no significant relationship. Just like for everything else here, we have a significant statistical relationship in terms of some statistical tests that I've run. We have a negative relationship, which is what we were looking for at the beginning, but it's very, very weak. Moving on to passing accuracy in the opposition half of the pitch. Again, very little relationship, but this is actually my strongest R² of any metric I tested, 0.12. We can't get past the point of explaining 12% of what is a slightly rubbish metric in terms of when a player broke through into the Premier League. And finally, just to show you a player's non-penalty goals plus assists per 90 minutes output, because that's what we're looking for, or one of the things we're looking for, rather, at the end of the day, there's again no relationship whatsoever. However I divide this up, if I think about ages, if I think about specific clubs, specific groups of clubs, like the top 7 versus the bottom 13, if I think about whether these players have come directly from the Premier League or whether they've developed from the Championship and from the lower tiers of English football, there is at no stage for any of the metrics I tested any sort of significant relationship that I can present to you. So my hypothesis is absolutely wrong. It's completely incorrect. There is no way we can tell how good a player might become by when they were considered a starlet in the Premier League, by when they broke through. And a more amusing correlation that I found was that you actually can't even predict the minutes that a player will get later on in their career based on their breakthrough. In other words, we learn nothing about how much a coach will like a player at 28, at least based on their minutes, if they broke through into the Premier League at 17, like Raheem Sterling, or they broke through at 27, like Jamie Vardy. And we can actually go further than that. Even year-to-year repeatability in minutes is really terrible, or at least it has been over the last 9 years. Of course, you have injury considerations, etc. But generally, I think before I thought it was intuitive that if a guy is getting a lot of minutes when he's 24 years old, he's more likely to be some sort of key player. And so on average, he'll probably get lots of minutes at the age of 25, but that's just not the case at any level, whatever age we look at. And to give a more specific example of this, when a player is 20, we think that if he was considered a young star, he's getting lots of minutes. He's a Jack Wilshere, a Raheem, well, maybe not Jack Wilshere, a Jordan Henderson. Then he might be getting similar sorts of minutes at 25. You have aging problems, you have injury problems, but generally I thought that should be the case. It's just not true. There's no relationship whatsoever. So how might we predict the future if not using the breakthrough of players? Well, instead of when clubs think a player is going to become a young star, perhaps we can look at what their actual output looks like. Assists are a slightly annoying creative stat to use. There's not a lot of repeatability within them. Your assist today doesn't tell you that much about your assist tomorrow, but it's something that we'd like to look at as something that seems quite important to the game, and chances created predict them reasonably well, because you assist more shots than you assist shots that happen to lead to goals. And chances created has incredible repeatability over a huge number of years. We explain 76% of the variation in chances created in 7 years' time, based on how many chances created you have today. And I'm not even being selective with this R². Predictive power actually improves if I include players from outside of the filter. I haven't here because I wanted to make sure that the previous results weren't just a quirk of the sample. But if we add those players from outside of the filter and go even further into the future, the R² actually improve. But I wanted to standardise it at 5 years just so that I'm not drawing massive conclusions here from tiny amounts of data. And again, we see that the relationship is pretty strong. And if we add more and more information, right? If we don't just have this one season that this young player has played, but we have 2, we have 3, we, as you would expect, build a better and better picture of what their chances created might look like in 5 years' time, which obviously is very useful for planning. We also know, on a similar note, that shots predict goals very well, not only at the team level, but also at the player level, right? Like, unless you're an Andros Townsend, or apparently an Ishmael Miller, if you're taking an elite number of shots, and those shots aren't in terrible locations, it seems plausible to think, and the data agrees, that you are likely to get a fair amount of goals. And shots predict shots in the future pretty well, right? This is year 1 to year 5, and we're explaining 52% of the variation in 5 years' time. And again, if we get a clearer pattern, this is even before adjusting for age, because of course, in 5 years' time, if your player's 22, you're expecting them to score more, whereas if they're 30, that's not so much the case. If we add your shots per 90 over the last 4 years, we can say really quite a lot about what your attacking output might look like next year. And finally, just because this is one of the things we're going to be looking for, fundamentally, your non-penalty goals plus assists per 90 minutes, they're predicted pretty well by your shot contribution this year. It predicts reasonably well your actual goal output in 5 years' time, which I think is pretty promising. And again, if we add several years of data, that relationship only improves. And this is with metrics that aren't as repeatable and aren't as successful at the player level or team level as something like expected goals. So I think it's pretty promising. But that isn't looking at age curves, which is originally what I wanted to talk about to you. I originally wanted to talk about development, right? So previously, we could plot the distribution of shots in the Premier League. And we can say that Theo Walcott is maybe a top 10% player in midfield and forwards for taking shots in the league. Or if we had better metrics like expected goals, we could say that they're in the top X percentile, X quantile. But of course, these distributions change with time, right? Like if Theo Walcott is in the top 5% of 18-year-old shot takers, that's much better than just comparing him to the whole league. And with more and more data, not only about the league, since this goes back 9 years, but also about individual players' careers, we can really start to spot patterns in how players are developing, because you'd expect them to develop non-linearly, but we want to know a little bit more about that. This is the 5th quantile of the shot distribution in the Premier League for any given age, then the 20th quantile, the 50th quantile, or the median, the 80th quantile, and the 95th quantile. So here you're just about in the bottom 5% of shot takers in the Premier League at, I think I was pointing to 21 years old, and here you're just about in the bottom 20% of 22-year-old shot takers in the Premier League. We want to know how our player is developing relative to all of the other players that have gone before him. And to go on a quick tangent, when I plot these graphs, every single time, whatever metric I use, I generally find, well not generally find, whatever metric I use, I find that the aging curve looks significantly earlier than what we usually expect it to. We expect that players are at their peak at 26, 27, 28, and indeed when we plot minutes, that is the case. And I wonder if there might be some sort of recency bias in the minds of coaches. If your player is at their actual peak, in terms of shots or expected goals or whatever we're using, at 25, perhaps a coach sees that and at 26, 27 recognises them as a proven Premier League player. We know that they can contribute significant amounts to output, and therefore that is when we play their peak number of minutes. I don't want to say anything too definitive about this for 2 reasons. Number one, 25, 26, where this particular map drops off, is also kind of the age where Ronaldo left the Premier League, Bale left the Premier League, Suarez left. So perhaps it's that that's contributing to this effect. And also because it's perfectly possible that these players are just taking better shots instead of more shots. And that is a better representation of the age curve. So, to leave the tangent quickly, here is Theo Walcott. He has approximately the same shots per 90 minutes at both 20 and 24, but at 20 he's in the top 5% percentile, he's in the 95th percentile, and at 24 he's a bit closer to the 10% mark. So he's only better than 90% of Premier League players, and he doesn't have enough minutes to go further into the future. So in terms of what to take away, for clubs, I think there might be reason to doubt the causal link between getting elite getting lots of minutes, getting lots of elite minutes in the Premier League, and how good you become later on in your career, which might imply something like perhaps we should be sending more kids to Belgium, to France, to the Netherlands. If we think that these minutes are important for their development, then maybe it makes sense to maximise the trade-off between the quality of minutes that they're playing and the number of minutes they're playing, given that we know, or I think the data suggests, that them not having these elite level Premier League minutes might not have a significant effect on what their final outcome is. And then, for federations, maybe Arsene Wenger is correct. Maybe young players are actually playing too much competitive football, not what's usually thought, which is that they're playing too little. Perhaps we should think more often about how the reason why the German national team is so good is not because more young German players are playing in the German league. The reason why more young German players are playing in the German league is because the German system is so good. I think if you're going to highlight minutes played at the top level as something that you're looking for development as a federation, perhaps there's reason to doubt some of those conclusions. And furthermore, I think that homegrown policy might have been slightly counterintuitive in that, although I don't want to expand on that too much today. And finally, just as I've given you a massive conclusion that's partly to do with my biases and that the data might not wholly support, I want to warn you against doing exactly that. This is a framework for thinking, right? You should go and look at different leagues, better metrics, far better metrics than I've used in this presentation. But I think this is a useful way of thinking about development. In terms of data issues, I've spoken about loads of them, except for bias. Some early Kolmogorov-Smirnov tests seem to suggest that there aren't large statistical differences between the players in my filter and the players outside of it. So maybe some of the conclusions that I've reached today might also apply to some of the guys that are spending one season in Ligue 1 and then coming to the Premier League. No one wants to be Nate Silver if Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination. So as I've said, take everything with full context as per usual, and thank you very much for listening.
Cheers for watching that. It was humbling to be allowed to talk and also to listen to some really lovely feedback from people that I professionally admire afterwards. As per usual, all the advertising revenue from this channel goes to the most effective charities in the world. We recently pushed past the £500 mark with a £100 donation to the Giving What We Can Trust, most of which, the vast majority of which actually this time, was through your fundraising, so thank you very much. If you want to donate, there's a link in the description below where you'll also find a link to my transparent YouTube finances. More selfishly, if you want to follow me on social media, you can find those links in the description below. And otherwise, I think I will see you for the next video on, hopefully, Saturday. Until then, see you later.